He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
If you're retired and thinking about downsizing your home, is it better to do it sooner or later? Is money safer in KiwiSaver or a bank? And is our fuel poorer quality? That's some of what we're discussing on this week's episode of No Stupid Questions, the podcast getting answers to all your money questions. I'm Susan Edmonds, RNZ's money correspondent, and I'm joined this week by Mary Argue, who's doing her best Justin impression.
Hello, yes, I am. It's actually quite a visual impression, but it's a pleasure to be here, Susan. Thanks for having me.
Sorry that we're missing out on the visual experience. Okay, let's go into the inbox.
All right, so the first question is from Charlie, who wants some advice about downsizing. So it sounds like Charlie is emailing on behalf of a couple, and he says they're retired and have had both hips replaced. Not sure if that's both of them or both hips, but anyway, they find that their two-storey house isn't a great fit, naturally. They're confident they could sell their house for about $1.2 million. So they're talking about their options, and they're not keen on a retirement village. So they want to know how they should use the money they free up and what the pitfalls are of leaving the decision later. What do you reckon?
Well, I think downsizing is quite an interesting one because I often hear from people who plan to downsize because they're in a 4 or 5 bedroom house and there's only 1 or 2 of them. But sometimes it can be harder than they expect because it can be quite difficult to find places that are significantly cheaper and that you're happy to live in and smaller. And also people often have areas of the country that they want to be in. They might think they're going to move to a cheaper part of the country, but then they find that's not easy because they want to stay near their family or their friends or even just, the supermarket that they know. But all that aside, it makes sense to me that this couple would want to be living in a 1-storey house. And if they can shift and free up some money, that's great. They should get some advice on it, but things they could think about doing with that money would be, putting it in a managed fund perhaps. The length of time that they have until they think they will need it will influence how much risk they should take with it. And as for whether it's better to act sooner or later, I ran that past Cotality's head of research, who's Nick Goodall.
If you think I'll hold on a little bit longer and, you're going to get a better price, then that's definitely fraught with risk right now because there's more expectation of downward pressure on prices than upward. But potentially means that you might get a better bargain for the house you buy as well. So the old classic of buying in the same market you're selling in rings true here as well. To me, for these sorts of situations, I can't see the strong case for holding on. It would all be about those expectations of what you want to get for your property and what you're looking at and how those markets are going. But, there's some pretty good options out there now for single level living.
Susan, when you say the length of time they have until they think they need it, what are you meaning there as such?
Well, if it's money that they need to come and go on now, for their supermarket shopping or whatever, then they should probably not be taking much risk with that at all because they need to know what they've got there. But if they are willing to put it off and they won't need the money for 10 years, say, then they could take a bit more risk with it because they'll have time to see the balance move a bit if the markets get a bit volatile, as they have been lately.
Now, this one is from Michael, who says he transferred his KiwiSaver into a cash fund when he hit 66. Now he wants to know, is it safer in KiwiSaver than a bank? And would he get higher returns on a bank deposit? He's got $40,000. What does he mean by that? Safer in KiwiSaver or a bank?
Yeah, I can answer this without knowing who his KiwiSaver provider is. KiwiSaver funds aren't covered by the Depositor Compensation Scheme, which is what guarantees up to $100,000 of savings per person, per institution, if a bank fails. But there are other layers of protection that give you peace of mind in KiwiSaver. So KiwiSaver providers are overseen by a supervisor like Public Trust, and that supervisor is then monitored by the Financial Markets Authority. And the supervisor makes sure that the scheme's doing the right thing for investors. And there's also a custodian who's responsible for the investments. So, there's safety on both sides there. I don't think there's wild differences between them. And as for what gets the better returns, ANZ, for example, says its cash fund has returned 3.75% over the past year, and term deposit rates at the moment are about 3.7% a year. So
Okay, so kind of much of a muchness, or what's that expression? 6 of one, half a dozen of another?
Yeah, I guess with term deposit rates, that's locked in for that period of time. You know that's what you're going to get, whereas there can be a bit more variation with the cash funds.
Okay, hey, the next question we have is from Jared. He wants to know what's going on with the quality of fuel. He says, can you find out if quality of fuel has been lessened and what damage this could do?
I asked Terry Collins at the AA about this, the man who's getting a lot of media questions at the moment, and he says basically no, the quality of petrol hasn't lessened. He says test results over the last couple of years showed even the worst fuel met the specifications, and some of it was such good quality that 95 petrol was actually closer to 98. But I also asked him whether different brands have different quality petrol, and he says no, again.
No. In fact, our fuel spec, one of the problems that we've got is that we've got such a good fuel spec. No, there's a quality premium that's put on the fuel that we buy because we buy such good fuel from the countries don't have the quality of fuel that we have, and as a consequence, we do pay a premium for it. No, it's a basic homogeneous commodity. Get it the best price.
All right, so sticking with fuel, I guess a hot topic at the moment, Nigel wants to know what's been going on with prices. He says, my layman's assumption is that oil would be paid for when the buyer effectively takes possession of it, so upon departure from the port in the Middle East. Why are we already paying high prices for fuel which have already been in New Zealand or in transit before the present war started? It always seems that prices go up faster than they go down.
Yes, we've talked about rocket and feather pricing. That's something the Commerce Commission said was happening in the fuel market because prices go up faster than they come down. That's the impression anyway. Other people aren't so sure that's the case though. Shamabil Yaqub said to me it's probably that we're just watching the prices a lot more intensely when they're going up than when they're falling. But I asked Zed, which said retail prices were set with reference to replacement cost. So they should reflect the cost to purchase the next shipment of refined fuel, not the one that we're actually getting at the moment. And it says it also has to take into account shipping costs, the exchange rate, things like that. So prices are usually responding to sustained changes in global markets over time rather than short-term movements. And Zed said with margins typically only a few cents per litre and diesel input costs having increased by around 200 cents per litre since the start of the conflict, there is inevitably a time lag as higher costs work through their system. I thought people might be a bit sceptical, so I went and asked Brad Olsen at Infometrics about this too. He says there are a few things going on and a few reasons why the recent drop we've seen in oil prices, which I think has moved around a little bit more since I talked to him about this, might not help us much in the short term.
Yeah, so there's sort of two elements to this. The first is that the fuel companies often highlight that they generally are buying fuel on what they call replacement cost. So, when they're going out and setting their prices, they need to be able to afford the next shipment of fuel that comes through. If, for example, they were currently selling at, let's say, $3 a litre and the next shipment was going to be $4 a litre, if they sell their fuel at the $3 a litre, they don't have enough money to buy the $4 a litre when it's becoming available. That's part of it. The other part is that there's quite a few steps to the supply chain that often don't matter nearly as much, but do matter a lot more at the moment. So yes, you've seen the likes of international crude oil prices increase. Usually we reference the Brent crude measure, but equally for New Zealand, the Dubai and other Middle Eastern crude oils are more important because they're actually where our fuel comes from. But also the cost that you then get out the other end of the refinery, which is for New Zealand in South Korea or Singapore most of the time, can be quite different to the actual price of the crude. We've seen what they call the crack spread. Effectively, the sort of refined product price has changed quite considerably and increased even more than some of those international crude oil prices. And that's particularly due to the fact that a lot of refineries in the Middle East have been struck. Infrastructure has been destroyed by drones or missiles or whatever else. So the pressure on refineries that are left over, not only to find crude oil to process, but also to do the processing for all the demand for diesel and jet fuel has increased substantially. Long story short, looking just at crude international oil prices doesn't tell you the full story, and usually the businesses that are paying for fuel are pricing things in ahead of schedule, which is also why you'd expect that fuel prices would come down once oil prices also ease. For the moment, what you've seen is that Brent crude oil might have come back. The actual refined fuel costs coming out of the refineries in Asia, they haven't dropped because they haven't got fuel yet and they're still sort of feeling the pressure.
Something else Brad noted when we were talking is that the price of oil dropped even though nothing had really substantially changed at that point. It was all just on hopes and dreams. And we've seen since then how much the hopes and dreams can change the market again.
Now, Zoe says with the recent, we're changing tack a bit here, we're moving away from fuel. Zoe says with the recent minimum wage increase, she's been thinking about what she's being paid. She wants to know, when you think about KiwiSaver, holiday pay, ACC, the like, what is the minimum wage equivalent for those who are self-employed?
This is a really tricky one because, as Zoe points out, self-employed people aren't getting the perks of employment like holiday leave, KiwiSaver contributions from an employer, and they probably have costs to cover too, but there is no minimum wage for them. So if they were getting the current minimum wage of $23.95 an hour, they'd be banking quite a bit less than that in practice because, all those perks would come out of it. What the minimum rate is that should be charged, though, will depend a lot on what you're doing. So sometimes people are advised to look at what income they want to make over the year, what costs they'll have, that's a big one, and then work backwards to determine what they need to charge per day or per hour to get there. Then you might build in a bit of a buffer to allow you the space to do things like KiwiSaver, have a holiday, all that sort of good stuff. But there's also some stuff to think about, like the hours you might have to spend doing work that you can't bill a client for, like working on your business. And you also need to think about whether a per hour rate is better or a per job rate. And there's a lot to consider there because, you don't want to penalise yourself for being efficient. It's something that's probably a good idea to talk about with an accountant or a business coach and just chat through your pricing to make sure you're not shortchanging yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. One of those things you might want to buffer in, as you say, like sick leave. I mean, that's not something that contractors or self-employed get, is it?
No, that's right. And so you have to think, will you just not work or will you have to pay someone else to do the job for you? And that all totally depends on what kind of business you have and what it is you're doing.
Yeah, a lot to think about. Okay, our last question is from Aaron, who says a couple of years ago when he was 66, he decided to cancel his health insurance on the basis of the ever-increasing premiums. His wife was happy for him to cancel, but she wanted to retain hers. He says, when I cancelled it, I inadvertently cancelled hers. Apparently, I was the main policyholder and my wife was some type of appendage. So
we all aspire to be.
Yeah, oh dear. She was not happy, but accepted the situation. Recently, she tried to get cover reinstated. The premiums were going to be $500 per month with a 3-year stand-down period. So, Aaron, in a bit of a pickle here, he wants to know how can it be possible that he cancelled his wife's policy, and is this a reasonable position for the insurer to take? He's also concerned that maybe the government is pushing for us to go to private health insurance by stealth because of the overload on the public system. So a few questions there, Susan. Can you help?
Yes, there's a lot to unpack here. So to answer this, I went to Russell Hutchinson, who is a guru of all things insurance. He says it does seem weird that Aaron was able to accidentally cancel his wife's policy. He says the circumstances might make a difference here. Did Aaron own the policy with her added as a life insured? He says when you set up these policies, you want to make sure you both own them too. And that way any change has to involve you both and you can't just be tacked on the end there. He says he thinks there is a fairness issue at play, but he says he doubts it can be fixed now. But it's a reminder to pay attention to the details of insurance and for insurers not to rely on their clients understanding the implications of terminating their cover. And he says, as for whether the insurer is being reasonable now, he doesn't have enough information to say. He says he guesses Aaron's wife has some pre-existing conditions and the 3-year deferral relates to covering those, but other things would be covered from day one. It's worth looking through the detail, and I wonder, actually, this is me wondering, not Russell, whether an insurance advisor could help here.
Now, you recently had a story, Susan, about rest homes. I got a few people chit-chatting about. Do you mind just bringing us up to date? What was happening there?
Yeah, I looked into the issue of standard rooms. So rest homes charge a premium when a room is in any way non-standard. And that can be things like not having to share a bathroom or having a nice view. So the bar for being non-standard is quite low. And even people who qualify for the rest home subsidy are charged surcharges for non-standard rooms. And that can be up to $85 a day. It's a lot of money. And the big problem is that many providers just aren't making those standard rooms anymore. So even if you're happy to go with the basic offering in return for not paying a surcharge, you might not be able to. It could be really hard to find.
Right, so the perks are kind of there already. So, what do you do in that case? What can people do?
Yeah, I think if families are covering the cost in some cases, sometimes not-for-profit providers are cheaper. People who are really stuck, though, are just staying in hospital, which isn't great for the system.
No, all right. I mean, any solutions?
It's a funding problem, I guess. People are entering care apparently in a worse health position than they used to, and maybe the funding models haven't kept up.
Okay, now, Susan, last week you asked about Roblox. What's this?
I did, timely for the school holidays. We asked how Roblox shares have performed. So Roblox shares, and I should say Roblox is a game that's very popular with the, I would say, 8 to 12-year-old set.
Okay.
And the shares in that company opened at $64.50 US in their first day of trading, and they're now at about US $55. So, but in that period, they've been as high as 134, then as low as 25. So some investors could have done well. This was prompted by last week's story about a man whose son racked up a whole lot of in-game purchases. So the moral, I guess, is you were better probably to buy shares in Roblox than to buy Robux within the game.
Gotcha. Okay. Oh my goodness. Now this week we want to know which KiwiSaver fund you think performed the best over the 12 months of 2025.
Send your answers as well as any questions you might have to questions@rnz.co.nz. No Stupid Questions with Susan Edmonds was written and presented by Susan Edmonds. That's me. Justin Gregory is the producer. Mary Argue asked the questions this week. The engineer is William Saunders. Thanks to Charlie, Michael, Jared, Nigel, Zoe and Aaron for their questions. Nick Goodall, Terry Collins, Zed, Brad Olson and Russell Hutchinson for their answers. Follow and listen to No Stupid Questions with Susan Edmonds on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or any podcast app so you don't miss an episode. Stay safe, everyone.